I chose to compare Nathaniel Hawthorne's classic, The Scarlet Letter, written in 1850, to Emma Donohue's contemporary, Room, written in 2010. While not seeming so at first glance, these books are quite similar, even in their plot. The Scarlet Letter is about a young woman named Hester Prynne who moves to Boston, Massachusetts, while her husband stays in England to take care of affairs. 2 years after her arrival in Boston, she gives birth to her daughter, Pearl, and is therefore an adulteress. The town ostracizes her, especially because she does not reveal the identity of the baby's father. She is sentenced to wear a scarlet A on her chest for the rest of her life. Her husband finally arrives, under a disguise, determined to seek revenge and expose Pearl's father. Hester is consistently chastised as a sinner while the whole time the baby's father is a priest, who deals with his guilt by self-mutilation. To 5-year-old Jack, Room is home and the entire world. It is where he was born and where he grew up. Little does he know that at the age of 19, his mother was kidnapped by a man referred to as Old Nick. At night, his ma shuts him safely in the wardrobe where he is meant to be asleep when Old Nick visits. We find out that room is actually considered the prison where Old Nick has held Ma captive for 7 years. Through determination, ingenuity, and fierce motherly love, Ma has created a life for Jack. But she knows that this is not enough for her or Jack. She devises a bold escape plan that succeeds, but now her and Jack must adapt to the real world. Now, you're probably thinking, what similarities could there be between an old book about a woman who commits adultery and is outcast to a lonely and hard life, and a modern book about a woman who was kidnapped and raped regularly until she escaped? Well, let's see. Throughout both novels, we can see some similarities and differences between certain characters and the roles they play. Hester is the protagonist in The Scarlet Letter and can be compared to Ma, whose actual name is Sharon in Room. Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale can be compared to Old Nick, and Pearl is also very relatable to Jack. When Hester Prynne had an affair with the Reverend, she got pregnant and gave birth to a daughter and named her Pearl. However, when Ma was kidnapped at the age of 19, she was raped regularly and got pregnant twice. Her first child was a stillborn, but 2 years later she gave birth to Jack. Both of these women are very young and otherwise wouldn't have been ready for motherhood if not due to their current circumstances. For Ma, she has seen Jack as nothing but a blessing, although no woman would want to have a child with their rapist, as some see that child as a constant reminder of the traumatic experience, but Ma never doubts her love for Jack. She kind of sees him as a second chance after the loss of her first child. However, Hester sees Pearl as a blessing and a curse. Hester believes that she has done something wrong and believes that Pearl is living proof of her sin and a consequence that she must face. Pearl serves as a symbol of Hester's scarlet A, because although Hester can eventually take the A off, she must live with her daughter forever, but nonetheless, she learns to love her. Both women have children who serve as constant reminders of their struggles. If we compare their situations, we can see how they both handle it differently. Hester spends all her time trying to protect Pearl's father by not revealing his identity, while Ma has strong detest for Jack's father, which is reasonable considering he's holding her captive and rapes her daily. She expresses her hate, though not directly towards him, by constantly wishing him dead. While Ma spends all her time trying to find a way to escape from Old Nick, Hester spends the same amount of time trying to create plans to escape with the Reverend. This is ironic because although he has caused all this pain and suffering upon her, which by the way he doesn't have to endure, she still loves him and wants to be with him. They are both prisoners, as Hester was outcast from her society and forced to spend most of her time in a cottage on the outskirts of town, and Ma was literally imprisoned by Old Nick. Both of these women are seen to be strong, yet suicidal. During a conversation with her ex-husband, who was disguised as a doctor, Hester admits that she wants to be dead. Hester says, "I have thought of death, have wished for it, prayed for it." However, she doesn't actually go through with it because she always has that hope that things will get better. This is the same for Ma, as she was locked in a room for so many years and had several chances to kill herself and constantly thought of doing so, but never actually did, because she always had hope that one day her and Jack could escape. However, after their escape, Ma does attempt to commit suicide because of her emotional trauma, but as soon as the doctors are able to revive her, she immediately apologizes to Jack because she feels guilty for trying to leave him. They each have deeply rooted religious backgrounds. Hester was from a Puritan home but never practiced the religion much, and when outcast, she strays away and abandons her religion because she believes that it's all very hypocritical. Whereas Ma turns to her Catholic religion in times of need because besides Jack, that's all she has. This is interesting because in the 1850s, people were more religious than now, but we see that this is the opposite for Hester and Ma. Near the end of each novel, both women become beacons of hope for their society. Everyone viewed how strong and determined Hester was, so the people in her society changed the meaning of her A for adultery to A for able, because despite all her struggles, she was able to overcome them. Ma was a symbol of hope not only to her community, but for women all around the world, as she was featured in interviews and newscasts and more. She helped raise awareness of situations like hers, or worse, and gave courage to other rape victims to speak up. Even though these books were written over 100 years apart and the main characters have similar problems that they overcome in different ways. Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale is a priest and Hester's adulterer. It is a sin already to take advantage of a married woman, but his status in society makes it that much worse. Old Nick commits a crime far worse than any other by literally stealing Ma and raping her. Although Hester consented to her relationship with the Reverend, both men ultimately stole the voices of these women. The Reverend swore Hester to secrecy, and now she is forever burdened with his secret. Old Nick clearly doesn't care for Ma and never asks her how she feels or what she wants. He forces her to do everything that he wants his way. Nobody in the communities ever suspected the Reverend or Old Nick. For Hester, it would have been her word against his. They would most likely have taken his word because he is a man of high status in the community, whereas Hester is just the girl who cheated on her husband. Ma was always afraid of Old Nick because he was much bigger than her. When explaining her story to Jack, Ma says, "The first time he opened the door, I screamed for help and he knocked me down. I never tried that again." She was afraid of the physical harm that this man could cause her. Both of these men are bad fathers because they are absent in their child's lives. The Reverend has never offered to assist Hester in taking care of Pearl, nor does he treat Pearl like his own. In private, he kisses Pearl, but he won't do so in public because he's afraid of his secret getting out. But he hardly ever sees Pearl in private. He tells Hester that he doesn't want to get to know Pearl. He says, "I have long shrunk from children because they often show a distrust, a backwardness to be familiar with me. I have even been afraid of little Pearl." He thinks that children don't like him, so in turn, he's afraid of his own child and refuses to build a bond with her. Old Nick is Jack's father, but definitely doesn't act like it. He never sees Jack when he comes at night, and Jack is only aware of his presence because of the noises that he makes while raping Jack's mother. Jack says frequently, "Old Nick creaks bed," to indicate Old Nick's arrival. His mother does a good job of hiding him from Old Nick by making Jack sleep in the wardrobe. Old Nick is supposed to take care of Jack and his mother, but he buys them clothes that don't fit with all sorts of holes in them and shuts off their power for several days just to punish them. He really doesn't care if his son survives or not. In the end, Old Nick is now the one who is imprisoned as he is placed in jail and the tables have turned. Reverend Dimmesdale suffers from his guilt, which leads him to an early grave. Pearl and Jack are seen as illegitimate children because they were conceived outside of marriage and neither of their fathers claimed them. Ironically, in both novels, they never mention the children bearing any resemblance to their fathers. They are described as looking exactly like their mothers. In Room, Ma refers to Jack as her dead spit. Ma says, "It just means you look like me, I guess, because you're made of me, like my spit is." Since their mothers have no one else, Pearl and Jack serve as the only companions to Hester and Ma. However, since Pearl never knew her mother in her days before the Scarlet Letter, she does not recognize her without it. Hester once took it off and Pearl refused to go to her because she wasn't sure that that was indeed her mother. After Hester puts it back on, she says to Pearl, "Dost thou know thy mother now, child? Wilt thou come across the brook and own thy mother, now that she has her shame upon her, now that she is sad?" In response, Pearl said, "Yes, now I will. Now thou art my mother indeed." This is because that's what she's familiar with and everything else is foreign to her. Likewise, room is familiar to Jack. His mother never wants to return, but Jack sees it as home. The thing that these children cherish the most, because it's all they know, are the things that are causing their mothers the most pain. These children have no place in society. In the Scarlet Letter, it states, Pearl was born an outcast of an infantile world, an imp of evil, emblem and a product of sin. She had no right among christened infants. Jack also never felt comfortable around other children once he escaped from room. He always went to the park in the early morning so that he would avoid interaction with any other children. Now that I've discussed parallels between the main characters, I will go into detail of the themes that connect these two novels. The foundation of both books are based on sexual acts which are caused by selfishness and create the ultimate struggle for our main characters. Hester and the Reverend were both being selfish when they decided to have a sexual relationship. They were both aware of Hester's marriage and the sin that they were committing. They may have been aware of the consequences of their actions, but they sure didn't care. The Reverend knew he was being a hypocrite by practicing the exact opposite of what he preached. In room, old Nick was the selfish one committing all the unconsented sexual acts. One could say that he was so desperate for sex that he had to kidnap a woman just to get some. As pathetic as it sounds, this was the reality of it. He didn't care for the well-being of the woman or the family that she was leaving behind, but only that his needs and sexual desires were met. If it wasn't for the selfishness of these characters that led to the initial sexual relationship between Hester and the Reverend and the ongoing sexual assault by old Nick, there wouldn't have been a basis for these novels. Hester always felt confined in her marriage because she did not truly love the man that she was married to. When her husband hears that she'd had an affair, she says to her husband, "Thou knowest that I was frank with thee. I felt no love or feigned any." She never loved or pretended to love him. Thus, she was trapped, and her solo trip to Boston may have given her some freedom. Upon her arrival in Boston, she had no companions except the Reverend. It was the loneliness that she had experienced her entire life that led her to start the affair with Reverend Dinsdale. Hester is isolated physically since she is forced to live on the edge of town away from everyone else. Morally, since she has committed adultery and cannot turn to the church. Socially, since she is considered an outcast, an outsider, or an alien in her society. She never feels like she belongs because of the way she is shunned by her Puritan society for 7 years. At the beginning of the novel, when Hester is being sentenced to wear the Scarlet Letter, which is the symbol of her isolation, it states, "Measured by the prisoner's experience, however, it might reckon a journey of some length, for, haughty as her demeanor was, she perchance underwent an agony from every footstep of those that thronged to see her, as if her heart had been flung in the street for all to spurn and trample upon." The entire town has turned out to see Hester paraded through the streets like a criminal. Although she is surrounded by people, she's totally alone. As previously mentioned, Pearl herself is isolated because the other children mock her and she shares the ignominy of her mother. Hester and Pearl, like Jack and Ma, must find a way to fit back into society. The results of her isolation include a stronger bond with Pearl and a stronger self-esteem. She holds her head up high and does not cower. She does not hide behind her scarlet A. Because of this, members of the community come to admire her strength and her heart. On the flip side, Ma is isolated because she is literally taken from the world and forced to live in a soundproof 11 by 11 foot room for 7 years. Her captor, Old Nick, does not allow her to ever leave or maintain any communication with the outside world. Imagine yourself alone in a cramped room for even 2 months. You would probably go crazy. Not to mention the 7 years she spent there trying to make the best for her and her son. Although he spent all 5 years of his existence in that room alone with Ma, Jack, however, doesn't feel isolated until he is forced into the real world. Jack cannot belong because he is different from the other kids and doesn't quite understand how things work yet. While we get to see Ma and Jack escape room, Ma finds herself less free than she'd hoped because she's constantly being pursued by paparazzi, and Jack finds himself more free than he'd ever wanted. Once they've freed themselves from room, they are kept in isolation for therapeutic reasons at the clinic. This is where they teach Jack and his Ma how to flow into society. It's a slow process, but Jack is learning how to adapt to society and play with other children. Ma asks the clinic staff to help find a home for her and Jack. Like Hester and Pearl, they are placed at the edge of the city, away from all their family. She could have continued living with her mom, but she chose not to, because although it seems like she was isolating herself, this is where Ma finds her freedom. After 7 years of confinement, you would think that she would want to spend more time interacting with people, but she doesn't. Jack says, people don't always want to be with people. It gets tiring. Jack is beginning to understand the balance between spending time with others versus spending time alone. These two novels, written in different time eras, show how much didn't change. In the past, it was a struggle to fit into society, and it still is that, like Hester and Ma, in the midst of others, they can still feel isolated. 7 also seems to be a magic number between the two books because both Ma and Hester were secluded for 7 years each, which is how long it takes Ma to escape from old Nick's captivity and Hester to rise above the separation from her society. Ma and Hester had to remain strong in order to overcome the challenges they were facing. It is evident that neither Ma or Hester maintain a physical strength, but rather possess an emotional strength. Despite her lonely existence, Hester somehow finds an inner strength to defy both the townspeople and the local government. She must remain strong not only for herself, but her daughter Pearl. Similar to how Ma manages to remain strong for Jack, so that they can eventually escape. Had they been weak, they would have long ago committed suicide, as they each wished to, but they realized that they both had something to live for. Hester never once lost hope that she would be forgiven for her sin and once again become a part of the society, as Ma never lost hope that her and Jack would either be rescued or they would escape. Hester not only struggled with trying to keep Pearl safe, but also the secret that the Reverend Dimmesdale had entrusted her with. She is in a constant conflict with herself to expose him or protect him. She chooses the latter by allowing him to expose himself. Ma's inner struggle is dealing with the trauma of being raped, but she perseveres through, and the hate that she has built up for old Nick has given her the strength to testify against him. In the clinic, they show her a photo of old Nick and ask if it triggers any symptoms, and she replies by saying, "After 7 years of the real deal, you think I'm going to crumble at a photo?" This just goes to show how strong she's become over the years. The trials and tribulations that Hester and Ma face, though difficult to endure, is what allows them to grow mentally and emotionally, leading to their ultimate victory. In the Scarlet Letter, deceit plays a huge role as it does in Room. Both Hester and Ma find themselves lying to their children to protect them from the ugly truth. Hester never does tell Pearl the truth, but as Pearl grows older, she discovers it herself. Ma, however, confesses everything to Jack, while still at the young age of 5. She can no longer hide their true situation from him because he is beginning to ask too many questions and she does not have all the answers. Jack is very upset when he discovers that his mother has lied to him and that he's been deceived about the world the whole time. Reverend Dimmesdale is also a very big liar. He deceives the whole community and church congregation by constantly condemning Hester for her crime, but failing to mention that he was her accomplice. It is often heard that the truth will set you free, and in this case, it is very true. The truth is what set Ma and Jack free, because without having first explained the reality to Jack, he would have never understood and couldn't possibly help Ma escape. The truth also sets Reverend Dimmesdale free, as he felt that he had a very heavy heart that weighed him down over the entire course of the novel. But once he confesses his own sins, he is able to die a peaceful death alongside Hester. She no longer has to keep his secret and is relieved that they can finally share the same fate. These incredible books tell the stories of two strong young women that must overcome their struggles. They must subdue their feelings of despair and loneliness that go along with being secluded and oppressed by the men in their lives. Even though they go through similar problems, their reactions are very different. They handle their situations differently and each achieve what they'd been striving for the entire novel, which is freedom. Although there is a great difference between the time periods and the role of women has changed in society, we see that women are still seen as inferior and not much has changed. Thanks for watching and listening.